Hey everyone, welcome to part 115 of my Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we'll refactor the shop system to use the state stack architecture. So by the end of this video, we'll complete the refactor of all our states to use the state stack architecture. So yeah, let's get started. So right now, the shop is implemented by using enum states. So we have to convert all these states to use a state machine. So if you want, we can create a shop state and then make all these states a substate. But here, since we only have few states, I'm not going to bother using a substate machine. Instead, I'll just make all these states a state of the game controller. All right. For something like battle, which had a lot of substates, we have to use a substate machine. But the shop is much simpler, so we can just create them as separate states of the game controller. All right. So let's start creating these three states. So in Unity, inside the game states folder, I'll create another folder called shop states just to keep things organized. And in this folder, first I'll create a script for the shop menu state. And then I'll create a script for the shop buying state. And finally, I'll create a script for the shop selling state. All right. So I'll open up the shop menu state first. So this is a state from which we show this menu, right? So let's go ahead and implement that. So first I'll make this a state of game controller. Okay. And then I'll make it a singleton so that we can push the state from other classes. So let me create a public static instance of the shop menu state. And then I'll just initialize it from the awake function. All right. So next, let me override the enter function. And from the enter function, I'll cache a reference to the game controller. All right. So next, in the shop menu state, we need an input. So the input that we need is the list of available items. All right. So let me create a public property. So this will be a list of item base, and I'll call this available items. Okay. So next, we have to show this menu, and based on the selection from the menu, we have to go to the buying or the selling state. Right. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this function entirely, and I'll paste it in the shop menu state. All right. And then we can just call that function from the enter function of the shop menu state. Okay. So we have a few errors in this function. So let's fix them one by one. So here we don't need this line because we are not using the enum state anymore. So let me just remove that. And we also have one over here. So we can remove that. And now we have errors in the code that runs when the buy or sell options are selected. So we won't need this code here. From here, we'll just be pushing the buy and sell state, and all these things will be handled from those states. Okay. So let's just ignore the errors in the buy and sell choices. If the choice selected is quit, then we don't have to do anything because at the end of this function, we'll pop the state. Okay. So regardless of the choice selected, Once we reach here, the shop menu state will be popped. All right. So next let's implement the buy and sell state. So first I'll implement the buying state. So here I'll make it a state of game controller. All right. And then we need to make it a singleton and create the enter function and all that, just like we did in the shop menu state. So let me just copy this and paste it into the shop buying state. And here we have to change the shop menu state to shop buying state. All right. And then from the enter function, I'll call another function called start buying state. Okay, so let me go ahead and create that function here. All right. And from this function, we have to execute this code. So this is the code that we were previously executing for starting the buying state. So we have to move this into our start buying state function. All right. So we have few errors here. So here I can get the available items directly since we have it over here. And for these errors, we need to define them as a serialized field variable. So if you look at the shop controller, we have all these serialized field references here. So let me just copy these and paste it into the shop buying state. Okay. So here we don't need the inventory UI. The inventory UI is used for the selling state. So we can remove that. All right. Okay, I copied it into the shop menu state by mistake. So let me remove that and paste it in the shop buying state. All right. So some of the errors are gone. So next we need to define these two functions, buy item and on back from buying. So again, we can copy that from the shop controller script. All right. We need the buy item and the on back from buying functions. So let me just copy this and paste it into the shop buying state. All right. So we can remove all the lines in which we are using the enum states. We don't need that anymore. Okay. And in here, we need access to the inventory. So if you look at the shop controller, we were accessing it by caching it from the start function. So let's also do the same from the shop buying state. Okay. So that error is fixed. And now we have an error here in the on back from buying function. So now since we're using a state machine, for going back to the menu state, we can just pop the current state. So I'll call state machine.pop from here. All right. So all the errors are gone right now. And by the way, the shop UI doesn't use the generic selector right now. It's just a script that selects the items manually, but we have actions that will be executed when an item is selected or the back button is pressed. So it's kind of like our generic selector UI. So I'm not going to go through the trouble of converting this into the generic selector UI. I'll just use it as it is because this approach that we used for the shop UI is not that bad. Okay. So for this to work, we have to call the handle update from the execute function of the shop buying state. So let me go ahead and override the execute function. And from here, I'll call shop UI dot handle update. So when you do this, one edge case that we might have is we'll start calling shop UI dot handle update even before the shop UI is shown, right? So it'll take some time to move the camera here. So during that time, the shop UI won't be shown, but shop UI dot handle update will be called. Okay. So to prevent that, I'll just create a boolean over here called browse items. All right. So the idea here is we should only be able to browse items once the shop UI is shown. So when we enter the buying state, I'll set the browse items to false by default. And once we show the shop UI, I'll set it to true. Okay. We can also use that variable while we are doing other stuff from here, like showing the count selection box and all that. So at the start of the buy item function, I'll set browse items to false. And once we're done with this function, I'll set it back to true so that we can browse the items again. Okay. So now shop UI dot handle update should already be called if browse items is true. All right. So this is all we have to do for the shop buying state. So now from the shop menu state, if buy was selected, then we can go ahead and push the shop buying state. All right. So I'll use push and wait here because I want to wait until the buying state is complete. All right. So let me use yield return at the start to make this wait. And before we push the shop buying state, we also have to set the available items input. Okay. So we're done with the buy state. So next let's implement the sell state. So I'll go ahead and open the shop selling state script. And I'll make this a state of game controller. Okay. And next we have to make it a singleton and create the enter function and all that. So I'll just copy all those from the shop menu state to save time. All right. So in this case, we have to make this shop selling state. And from the enter function, I'll call another function called start selling state. Okay. So let me go ahead and define that function here. All right. So what should we do at the start of the selling state? We have to show the inventory and let the user select an item for selling, right? So previously, we were just enabling the inventory UI, but now we have a much better way of doing it. We can go ahead and push the inventory state. So let me do that. I'll call state machine.push. I'll actually use push and wait because I want to wait until a selection is made from the inventory. Okay, so we have to push the inventory state here and I'll wait for it to complete. So once it's complete, the item selected will be stored in the selected item property. So this is an output property of the inventory state. All right. So I'll just store this into a variable here just to make it easy to use. And then if the selected item is not equal to null, which means the user actually selected an item. He didn't press the back button or anything from the inventory. So in that case, we have to go ahead and sell this item, right? So for selling an item, we have a function in the shop controller called sell item. So let me just copy that and paste it into the shop selling state. Okay, and I'll call it from here. All right, and here for the item to sell, I'll pass the selected item. All right, so we have a bunch of errors in the sell item function. So first let me remove all the lines with the enum states. Okay, and then we have to define things like the wallet UI, inventory, count, selector UI, and all that. So we can copy that from the shop controller. All right, so here we don't need the shop UI and the shop camera offset. Those things are already needed in the buying state. Okay, and we also need the inventory in the selling state. So just like we did in the buying state, I'll cache a reference to the inventory from the start function. All right, so now all the errors are fixed. So if an item was selected from the inventory, we'll sell that item. And then I want the user to be able to keep browsing the inventory in case he wants to sell another item. So what I'll do is I'll wait for the sell item to complete instead of calling it in the start coroutine. Okay, and after the sell item coroutine completes, I'll go ahead and call the start selling state itself. Okay, so once we sell an item, again we'll open the inventory and make the user select another item for selling. Okay, and next, if the user presses the back button from the inventory, in that case we want to exit the selling state. So if the back button was pressed, then the selected item will be null, right? So here I'll just add a else clause for the if, and from here I'll just pop the state to go back from the selling state. All right, so yeah, this is all you have to do from the selling state. So now from the menu state, if cell was selected, we can go ahead and push the selling state. So again, I'm using the push and wait function because I want to wait until this is complete. And once we pop the selling state, we'll also pop the shop menu state. Okay, so we'll keep waiting until the buying and selling states are complete. And once they're complete, we'll pop the menu state also. Okay, so this is how it's going to work. So yeah, we're done with the implementation of all three states. So now, instead of using the shop controller script, we have to use these states. So let me go to the place where the shop controller is used. So from here, instead of using the shop controller, we have to push the shop menu state to the game controller. All right. So let me go ahead and push the shop menu state. And this state also needs an input, right? So let me assign the available items input. All right, so that's all we have to do. So now let's go to Unity and let's assign these three scripts to the game controller. So we have to replace the shop controller script with these three new states. So I'll actually go inside the essential objects and assign it from here. So first let me assign the shop menu state, and then I'll assign the shop buying and selling states. Okay, so we have few things to fill in the inspector. So if you look at the previous shop controller script, you can see all the values and where these game objects are. All right, so let me go back inside the essential objects and fill everything like before. Okay, so here we need the shop UI, the wallet UI, and the conflict UI. Okay, so we need the conflict UI here also, and in the selling state we need the inventory UI. So let me also assign that. So yeah, this is all we have to do. We can go ahead and remove the shop controller script now, and let's try testing the game and see if it's working. All right, so let me go talk to the merchant, and you can see that the shop menu state has been pushed. So let me try buying an item. Okay, I'll just try buying 2 super potions. So yeah, buying is working just like before, but now we are using the state machine for achieving this. Okay, so now let me just go back and try selling an item. So I just try to sell this max potion. Okay, so we have a problem with selling. So when we select an item for selling, we are going to the party state for using that item, right? So we'll have to handle that. So if you go to the inventory state, in here, when an item is selected, we are calling this function called select Pokemon and use item, right? But if the inventory was opened from the shop, then we should not do this, because when we open the inventory from the shop, the intent of that user is to sell that item, right? Not to use that item. So what we can do is we can check the previous state from here when an item is selected. Okay, and this should only be called if the previous state is not the shop selling state. Okay, and otherwise, if we opened it from the selling state, then we can just go ahead and pop the inventory state and go back to the selling state for selling the item. Okay, so this should fix that issue. So let me go to Unity and test this again. All right. So let me select sell and let me try to sell my max potion. So yeah, you can see it's working. We did not try to use the item this time. Okay. But if we select an item from the bag, in that case, we'll go to the party screen and try to use that item. Okay. So yeah, the shop system is working just like before, but now everything is done by using the state machine. Okay. So now we can also go ahead and remove the old shop controller script that's inside the items folder. So yeah, I'll just remove the shop controller script from here. Okay, but with that we have few errors because we are still referencing the shop controller inside our game controller script. So let me remove all the references. Alright, we don't need this here. We can actually remove all these if conditions now because we have converted all the states to use state machine instead of the enum state. And we can also go ahead and clean up all the old code that we are not using anymore. So from here, we can remove the game state enum entirely. So let me remove that. And once we do that, we also have to remove all of its references. So we don't need these three variables. Okay. And here we have a function called pause game in which we're setting the state to paused. So we'll have to achieve this by creating a pause state and then pushing that to the state machine. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that. So in the game states folder, I'll create a new script called pause state. All right. I'll make this a state of game controller. And let me make this a singleton so that we'll be able to push it. So I'll create a public static instance of the pause state. And I'll assign it from the awake function. Okay. So now from the pause game function, if pause is true, then instead of setting the enum state, we can go ahead and push the pause state to our state machine. All right. And from the else condition, we can go ahead and pop it. Okay. So now let's remove the other references of game state. So we don't need this line. And we have few references in this function, but we are not using this function anyway. It has 0 references. So we can remove this function entirely. All right. So finally, we can also remove this property since it's not being referenced anyway. Okay. So now all the code that uses the enum state is gone. We can confirm it by going to Unity and making sure that we don't have any errors in the console. All right, so we don't have any errors. So one final thing we have to do is we have to attach the pause state to the game controller. All right. And now we have fully completed the refactor of all our states to use the state machine architecture. Okay, so you can go ahead and test the game and make sure that everything works fine. All right, things like pause game is working fine. If it was not working, then we would be able to move during the scene transition. Okay, so that is working. So you can go ahead and test the entire game and make sure that there are no bugs. So yeah, I'm really glad that we are done with the refactor. It took a lot more time than I expected, and making these videos were much harder than doing an implementation of a feature because I kind of felt it hard to prepare for these kind of refactoring videos. So yeah, I'm really glad that it's over now, and now we can start working on new features again. So I'll stop the video here. If you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to my channel. That'll really help me a lot. You can also support this series on Patreon if you can afford it. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.